That's because after weeks of reports that the U.S. and China were close to a trade deal, President Trump appeared to do a 180 over the weekend, indicating that he now wants to raise tariffs on Chinese imports. Yesterday, on Sunday, Trump said in a tweet, "For 10 months, China has been paying tariffs to the USA of 25% on $50 billion of high-tech and 10% on $200 billion of other goods. These payments are partially responsible for our great economic results. The 10% will go up to 25% on Friday. $325 billion of additional goods sent to us by China remain untaxed, but will be shortly at a rate of 25%. The tariffs paid to the USA have had little impact on product costs, mostly borne by China. The trade deal with China continues, but too slowly as they attempt to renegotiate. No!" He then reiterated his new stance in another tweet just this morning. He said the United States has been losing for many years, $600 to $800 billion a year on trade. With China, we lose $500 billion. Sorry, we're not going to be doing that anymore. And our D.C. correspondent Jessica Smith joins us to shed some more light on these tweets, which were a surprise to many. Jessica, what was the reaction there?
Well, some people were surprised, but it's also important to note that it's not necessarily totally out of the president's playbook to threaten to hike tariffs or walk away as a negotiating tactic. And I talked to someone this morning who follows this very closely, who says, you know, the president, now that they're getting to the end of this, maybe he just wants to try to get a little more from China. So he's really putting the pressure on here. And this did surprise some people because the administration had been optimistic after each rounds of talks. They would say they were productive, they made progress on all of these issues, and they had wanted to wrap this up in the next week or so. That's what we were hearing from administration officials, saying that we would know one way or another if there would be a deal or not within the next week or so, that these would maybe be the final rounds of negotiations. But now we have to see if the president is going to follow through on this or if this is just another tactic to put pressure on the Chinese. But we need to see if these talks that were scheduled to happen here in D.C. are going to actually happen as planned. There is some concern that the vice premier might not come to D.C. to continue negotiations after the president's tweets. A spokesperson said this morning that the delegation was planning to travel still, but I mentioned there is some concern about whether or not the vice premier will come to D.C. for these talks.
Jessica, as you say, these threats are straight out of the president's playbook, and yet it does cast doubt, doesn't it, on all of the optimism we've heard for weeks. I mean, now it's sort of like hindsight 2020, but for weeks, every few days, there's a little drip of optimism. We hear a quote from someone like Mnuchin or someone like a Lighthizer, and we say, oh, they're really close. A deal is really close. And many of us have been skeptical about that, and I feel like now these Trump tweets saying, actually, let's raise tariffs, reinforce that the optimism over the last few weeks was maybe misplaced. Maybe they were never so close to a deal.
I mean, on Friday, the president talked to reporters and said that talks were going well, but he went on about how much he liked tariffs and the fact that he thinks the U.S. will be okay even if there isn't a deal made. He even said at one point it might even be better for the U.S. So that was something he said just on Friday. And when you heard from Mnuchin and from Mulvaney when they were talking about how these would wrap up after this round of talks, they also said there's the possibility that there would be no deal. They hoped to have an answer by the end of this. They could tell the president whether or not they recommend a deal. So they weren't ever coming out and saying we are going to have a deal at the end of this. They were saying that it's going to wrap up and we're going to either walk away or have a deal here. So we're going to watch to see what happens Wednesday.
All right, Jessica Smith in D.C., thank you so much.
Of course.